When we ask how an entire nation could turn towards such darkness, the answer doesn't always start with big political speeches. Sometimes it starts with a quiet, terrifying conversation, overheard by a child.
Just try to imagine being that boy, Helmuth. You're 11 years old, maybe lying in bed, and you overhear your dad, a respected doctor, actually debating whether he should kill his whole family or just himself. The very next day, after they had one last nice day out together, Helmut's father went into his office and shot himself.
So that's the big question, isn't it? What could this man have possibly done? What was he so deeply afraid of? Well, answering that question really gets us to the heart of how Nazi Germany happened and how ordinary people got tangled up in something so extraordinarily evil.
To really get why that father was so scared, we've got to rewind all the way back to the end of World War I. Germany was a nation on its knees, and honestly, the stage was being set for a total catastrophe.
Okay, so our story really kicks off in the ashes of Germany's defeat in 1918. The winners, the Allies, they forced Germany to sign something called the Treaty of Versailles, and it was less a peace treaty and more like surgery without anesthetic. It literally carved up the country.
And the terms of this treaty were just crushing. I mean, look at this. Germany lost huge chunks of its land, not to mention most of its iron and coal, the engines of its economy. Its army was basically disbanded. It was saddled with billions in payments. And maybe worst of all, the treaty forced Germany to take all the blame for the war. You can just imagine the deep, bitter resentment that created.
On top of all that shame, the economy completely imploded. First came something called hyperinflation. It's a wild concept, but it basically means your money becomes completely worthless, like overnight. And what that looked like in real life was people pushing wheelbarrows full of cash just to go buy a single loaf of bread. It's insane. Then, right when things started to calm down a little, bam! The Great Depression hits the entire world in 1929. By 1932, 6 million Germans were out of work. People's life savings? Wiped out. There was just despair everywhere you looked. So who do you think people blamed for all this? You got it. The new government. The Weimar Republic. It was a democracy, but it was born out of defeat. It was the government that signed that hated treaty. And now, it just looked completely powerless to fix anything. People totally lost faith in the whole idea of democracy. It felt like a joke.
And into this perfect storm of anger and fear and total chaos steps a man with a message that was simple, powerful, and in the end, absolutely terrifying. Adolf Hitler and his Nazi Party.
I mean, the contrast couldn't be more obvious. On the one hand, you had the Weimar years, which felt messy and chaotic. But the Nazis? They projected this image of incredible strength, of unity, of total order. They promised to swap out all that chaos for discipline and national pride.
And Hitler? Well, he was a master salesman. His message was perfectly designed for a population that felt broken. He promised to tear up that Versailles Treaty, to get everyone a job, and to make Germany a country to be feared and respected again. And for millions of desperate people, that was music to their ears.
And the results? They're just staggering. Look at this. In 1928, before the Great Depression really bit down, the Nazis were basically a nobody party, less than 3% of the vote. Just 4 years later, in the absolute pit of the crisis, they were the biggest party in Germany. The link between economic misery and political extremism is just crystal clear.
The Nazi propaganda machine was just relentless. With these huge rallies, with movies, with posters, they didn't just promote a politician. They built Hitler up into this messiah figure. He was the one, the only one, who could save Germany from all its problems.
So, in January 1933, Hitler becomes chancellor. The promise of a savior was kept, but that promise, it very, very quickly spiraled into a nightmare that would eventually consume the entire planet.
The speed of it all is just breathtaking. Hitler takes power in January. By March, democracy in Germany is dead. A fire in the Parliament building, which they probably set themselves, was the perfect excuse to suspend all basic rights. No more freedom of speech, no more freedom to protest. A month later, the Enabling Act basically gave Hitler the power to do whatever he wanted. Game over.
Now that they had total power, the Nazis could finally get to work on their core mission, creating a pure German race. And that meant getting rid of anyone they considered an undesirable. They had a chillingly simple and systematic 3-step plan to do it.
Step 1 was exclusion. Starting right away in 1933, they passed laws that just systematically dismantled the lives of Jewish people. They were fired from their jobs, their shops were boycotted, they were banned from public spaces, even from sitting on certain park benches. The goal was pretty clear: make their lives so miserable that they would just leave the country.
Then came step 2, ghettoization. Once the war started, the policy got even harsher. Jewish people and other groups were rounded up, kicked out of their homes, and crammed into sealed-off ghettos or concentration camps. They were transported in freight cars just like this one, packed in like animals. And that led to the final step, annihilation, the final solution they called it. Starting in 1941, they began to systematically empty those ghettos and camps. People were shipped to purpose-built death camps where they were murdered in gas chambers on an industrial scale. This pile of shoes, it's just a haunting, silent monument to millions of stolen lives.
The numbers are they're so large, it's hard to even comprehend. 6 million Jewish people. And that's not all. Millions of others. Roma people, Poles, Soviet prisoners, disabled people. Anyone who dared to disagree with them. It was a war of extermination against anyone who didn't fit their twisted ideal.
Which brings us right back to where we started, back to that 11-year-old boy, Helmuth, and back to his father's terrifying, all-consuming fear of revenge. And here it is. This is why he was so scared. Helmuth's dad wasn't just some guy who went along with the Nazis. He was an active player. He was a doctor in the euthanasia program, which meant he had personally condemned disabled Germans to be murdered. He knew exactly what he'd done, and he was terrified that the victorious Allies would now do the very same thing to him and his family. His fear wasn't of injustice, it was of a cold, brutal justice he knew he deserved. You see, the story of Nazi Germany isn't just a history lesson in a textbook. It's a warning. It shows us how a toxic mix of national shame, economic collapse, and a slick propaganda machine can convince a country to throw democracy in the trash and embrace hate. It forces us to ask ourselves, what makes ordinary people do evil things? Or, maybe just as important, what makes them just stand by and look the other way? And what would we do?